Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 81. I'm your host, Joe from Jersey, Joe Hannan. This episode is largely going to be informed by my experiences at World Master, IBJJF World Master, as well as coaching at a recent local competition. Voice is a little hoarse this morning because head coach Shane McCarthy at Princeton BJJ was cranking the shit out of my larynx as he was demonstrating some guillotines last night. So that's why you're hearing that. Thank you, Shane. But yeah, as I've mentioned on previous episodes of this podcast, in the post-Worlds world that I'm in right now, I'm trying to place an emphasis on coaching and becoming a better coach in the interim season between competition season, which for me, I tend to cluster my competitions between the months of May and August, concluding with Master World. So you're going to hear from me periodically in the interim on the subject of coaching. And this is coming from things I observe both with my team and with random people, random athletes at these various competitions over the past couple of weekends here. So yeah, this episode is going to most likely be called How to Prepare for BJJ Competition. I don't actually title the episodes until I create the tiles for Instagram and for the various podcasting platforms, because there's an amateur designer inside of me who cut his teeth designing newspaper pages, and sometimes you might have an idea for a title or a headline and it just doesn't look quite right, so you have to come up with something else. So that's why I sometimes hedge when I'm titling these episodes while recording. But this one is subjectively going to be about preparing for competition. And, I'll say this. It seemed like years ago you could expect a more sophisticated competitor at an IBJJF level competition because it's a little bit more expensive. It tends to attract people who are more familiar with the competitive aspects of the game. But man, I saw some wild shit from black belts at World Master this year in Las Vegas. And I wonder how much of that is a product of the fact that it's this huge event. It's like the Super Bowl of Masters level grappling. It's in the entertainment capital of the world. So it attracts a lot of people who say to themselves, well, I'll run it out there in Las Vegas just for the excuse of going to Las Vegas, which good on you in some respects. But in other respects, you might want to actually make a more qualitatively positive effort in terms of preparation and in terms of what you do on the actual fight day. And historically, that's the kind of stuff you would expect to see more so at a local competition, especially among blue belts, white belts, and some purple belts, particularly in the adult division. Those are some of the more entertaining matches for me to watch for all the wrong reasons. They're also some of the most frightening matches for me to watch. So I hope that if you're listening to this podcast and you're on the fence about competition, or maybe you have one or two under your belt, you can come away with this with a few ideas in terms of improving your performance on the day of and improving your preparation in advance. So let's go through some of these observations that came up for me. The first observation is arguably one of the most overlooked observations I've encountered among competitors, and that's you need to know the rules. I can't tell you how many times we've had athletes in our school or just observing other athletes in the arena who clearly don't know the rules. Every competition is going to have its own rule set. A lot of times they will just default to the IBJJF rule set, but you need to take the time to familiarize yourself with that rule set. Otherwise, you could make a really critical tactical blunder that gets you disqualified. For example, I've seen athletes slam other athletes inside a closed guard, instant disqualification. I've seen white belts attempt to jump closed guard, instant disqualification. We had one athlete on our team, and I don't want to single anybody out, but this is sort of just a valuable learning experience. So I'm going to share a bunch of these valuable learning experiences with you. So I'm not going to name names, and I apologize in advance if anyone at the school is listening and this sort of hurts your feelings a little bit, but I know that I'm not trying to pick on you here. I'm just trying to, I'm sure you're never going to make these mistakes again, and know that I'm just trying to share information with other people and help them avoid making the same mistakes. So we had one athlete. He's great guy, and he had lost his first match via triangle, and we had a discussion between rounds about posture and avoiding the triangle, etc. And he went out for his second fight and immediately got locked into another triangle. And quick thinking on his part, he's a bright guy. He couldn't shake the guy off after standing with the submission locked. So he thought to himself, okay, I'm just going to walk out of bounds and then the referee will reset us and it will reset without the triangle. Problem with that is you can't do that. That was an instant disqualification. And I could tell this guy was super bummed about it. And he'll never make that mistake ever again. And hopefully if you're listening to this, you won't either. But you need to read the rule set before you compete. No one expects you to have it memorized, but the high level stuff in terms of submissions that you can and can't do, that's what you have to have in your brain. Another thing I see in terms of the rule set violations is this concept of the verbal tap. At least under the IBJJF rule set, historically, if you sort of cry out in any way, it could be in frustration or in pain, the referee is supposed to interpret that as a tap and the match is supposed to end. I've seen people at this local competition and in the IBJJF competition competing against our athletes who verbal tap and then somehow negotiate their way into the match resuming. I don't know what that's about because the match is supposed to stop pretty much under every rule set I know, and that's designed in particular to just avoid injury. I don't know why the referees are getting lax on that, but just know that you have to keep your mouth shut. Keeping your mouth shut is great advice in general for competing. Let your coaches do the talking. We'll get into that more later. But yeah, you got to know about the verbal taps. And then finally, this is one of the more frustrating not knowing the rules aspects that I see over and over and over again. I cannot tell you how many times I've said to our athletes, you need, especially if you're competing in an IBJJF competition, you need to have an IBJJF compliant gi and you need to have a brand new belt. And both of those things ideally should only ever be worn for competition. Now, I understand there are some among you who have financial constraints and that's a real burden and you just can't accommodate that. Okay. Some people can't have a gi strictly dedicated to competition. I accept that. But again, you have to know the rules. You have to know what rule set your organization is following, and you have to make sure that your gi is compliant. I've seen at IBJJF comps, some of our athletes get turned away from the gi check area and then have to go scramble to buy a gi elsewhere. They buy that gi, it passes inspection, and then they come back for another IBJJF competition, and that gi no longer passes inspection. So much of this is extremely subjective in the eyes of the referee. But again, if you're competing in an IBJJF comp, they stipulate what passes muster and what doesn't. They're even selling this tool now that you can purchase for yourself to check your own gi. All of these things are great ideas to do. And I cannot emphasize the belt thing enough. I've seen so many athletes, again, turned away from the bullpen because their belt's a little bit frayed. Just the belt, if you're going to splurge on any dedicated comp item, exclusive comp item, the belt is worth it. I know everybody wants to go out there with their stripes on their belt and show how badass they are because their belt's so worn. It's probably, hopefully, because you're just washing it all the time. Subject for another discussion, I guess. But yeah, just do that. Be in compliance with the rules. We had an athlete at this competition sign up for the no-gi division, and this was his first ever competition, white belt, and he was wearing shorts that had pockets. And I was reffing his second match. He ended up beating the guy, but the other guy's coach was just furious that he was even allowed to compete in the first place because he had shorts with pockets. So I had to scramble with another coach to go and track down a pair of shorts without pockets for this guy. Fortunately, we could borrow one from another athlete who had a backup pair of shorts. And because I didn't want him to run out there, win, and have this become an issue. But again, IBJJF competition, there's no way he would have even been allowed out on the mat. So he would have spent all that money to not compete at all. So know the rules, know what uniform requirements are, and follow them all to a T, guys. Next thing I want to talk about is preparation. And this can be an episode all in its own. In fact, it probably will be at some point. I'm learning a lot right now about strength and conditioning. And sort of once I have that base in place, I'll probably do a series of episodes or one episode in particular dedicated to preparing. But in sort of like the gold standard book on strength and conditioning, I'll put it in the show notes. It recommends an 8-week preparatory program. And I understand that some of you don't have 8 weeks to prepare, but you should have a fight camp. Okay. We had this one athlete, he's a great guy, but he was preparing sort of sporadically for this competition, and he was nervous about it. And even if your body is in great shape and your jiu-jitsu is in good shape, you don't want to go out psychologically into a match thinking to yourself, oh man, am I prepared? You should be walking out there thinking to yourself, I have done everything I possibly can to get ready for this match, and there is no doubt in my mind that I could have done more. It's all been laid out on the table. And this is something that you can plan out with your coach, right? You can sit down. Shane is amazing at this. You can sit down with your coach and say, hey, I want to do this competition. It's 10 weeks away. How do I spend 8 weeks getting ready? Talk to your coach about your strength and conditioning planning. Talk to your coach about how you're going to train on the mats and when you're going to train on the mats and what you're going to do at a specific level of intensity. These are all important elements to getting ready for a competition. And I've seen so many athletes over the years who 2 weeks out will turn around and say to us, Coach, I'm taking this super fight next weekend. And it's not only ill-advised, but it's kind of a big fuck you to your team and your coach, because you're going to go out there wearing your team's regalia, your team's logo, representing the team effectively, and you haven't done what you could have to be the best representation of that team. And again, I don't take a ton of umbrage to that, especially from lower belts, because you don't know what you don't know. So that's why I'm putting this out here. You need to think about every time you're going out there and fighting, you're representing your school. It's more than just representing your jiu-jitsu. You're representing your team. You're representing everybody you share sweat, blood, and tears with. So you want to do that to the best of your ability. And the way you do that is by making a plan and preparing accordingly. You don't want to go out there out of shape. You don't want to go out there unprepared. You don't want to go out there unfamiliar with the rules. So have a conversation with your coach and then make a plan and follow it. It's pretty simple. Point 3, also along the lines of planning. This is something that I fault not just athletes with, but particularly coaches. I think historically, jiu-jitsu coaches have been quite bad at this, where the week of a fight, we're shark tanking people. We're pushing people to the point of exhaustion, potentially burnout, potentially injury. If you familiarize yourself with the research on strength and conditioning, like I'm doing right now, it is abundantly clear that for any performance-based athlete, which is pretty much every athlete in every sport, you need to have some sort of taper in place where you're gradually ramping down intensity leading up to the competition, because everybody is going to have a peak in their ability to perform. And you want to time that peak to coincide with the event as perfectly as you can. You don't want to peak a week before the event, keep grinding yourself down, and then go into the event depleted. We'll talk more about depletion in the next section of this podcast. So yeah, you want to be tapering down your intensity leading up to the event so that your peak performance coincides with the day of the event. And how do you do this? You do this by having a conversation with your coach and having a plan in place. And the consequences of this are actually pretty dire if you do this wrong. It's not just losing. One of our athletes was fighting this very large man who appeared to be in his 40s, potentially early 50s. And he was a white belt, so again, inexperienced. He fought a good fight against our athlete, ended up winning. But then in the next match, he was locked up with an opponent standing with sort of, both of them had matching collar and sleeve grips. And, I looked away for 1 second and I looked back because this guy just kind of screamed out in pain. I didn't see what happened, but somehow he just destroyed his elbow, to the point where he was having a hard time straightening his arm. And it wasn't apparent to me that any sort of submission attempt had happened. Like, I think the way it seemed to me, again, playing a game of extremely incomplete information here, was that this was just sort of like a wear and tear thing where the adrenaline was going and something that was already weak blew out. So why did that happen? I don't know. It could have happened for any number of reasons, but generally speaking, I've found, based on my experience, when some sort of catastrophic injury like that happens on the mat, it's either because there was some sort of acute injury involved, like somebody gets put in a flying armbar, the armbar happens really fast and something breaks, or there was just sort of underlying wear and tear and there's a straw that breaks the camel's back. So the way we're going to avoid those straws breaking the camel's back is by setting up an intelligently paced training program that tapers at the right time. We can't expect to push the engine in the red the entire time and then redline it even more and even more intensely during a competition, because we cannot really, it's very difficult for us to replicate the physiological response that comes with competition, because it's an acute stress that only exists in that setting, right? So as intensely as you're ramping up your metabolism, your physiology in the training room, it's never going to be as intense, in my opinion, as it's going to be in that moment. The strain is going to peak in that moment. So we want the body to have capacity to deal with that strain. We do that by setting an appropriate training plan. We do that by including an appropriate taper. Next point. In terms of wear and tear, strain on the body, mental and physical stress, I have seen nothing more taxing and frustrating for athletes in the competitive arena than weight cuts. It's slightly different, I think, than, say, MMA or boxing, where, you can rehydrate and eat all you need to eat the night before the event because you need to make weight the day prior. Most jiu-jitsu competitions that I've been a part of, you have to make weight and then immediately go fight. So you have to ask yourself, especially in a situation where you may have to go multiple rounds, do you really want to go out there dehydrated? Do you really want to go out there starving? I'll give you an example from my personal example, so you can see I'm not picking on anybody here. I'm just sharing information. My very first competition, for some reason, I had it in my head that it would be a good idea for me to cut weight. And I think normally I was around like 165 and I dropped down to 155. I looked like a skeleton. Like, I have this picture somewhere in my phone that I took of my abs after training, and my abs had like bulging veins, like what I have on my arms. That's not good. That's not good at all. I went out and I fought my first match and I won. And I just remember thinking, like, oh shit, I have to do this 3 more times. And like, I can barely, people talk about their grips burning out after their first match in a gi match. It was like my whole upper body burnt out. It was impossible for me for a little bit to lift my arms up above shoulder level. And that's because I had depleted myself to such an extent where I just had no glycogen reserves in my body. And it didn't matter how good my aerobic capacity had gotten, because there was just no fuel to burn other than, I guess, oxygen. So weight cuts, we had one of our athletes fight this absolute giant of a guy. And I was really on the fence about how to counsel him on preparing for this match, because I just know how disastrous weight cuts can be. I still kind of maintain the position that unless you're on the cusp of that super heavy division, where it's essentially an open weight class, it's generally not a good idea to cut weight, both for reasons of physical depletion and also because, again, just like the uniform check, you could show up the day of and not make weight because, like, let's say you were a little bit nervous that morning and you couldn't shit, so you're carrying an extra 2 pounds of weight. Do you really want to miss your fight and blow all the preparation you did, like, because you didn't take a shit that morning? This stuff happens. I had a similar experience on my way to the New York Open as a blue belt, where I was right on the line on my weight class, and I woke up in the morning And somehow I had gained weight in the night, and I'm driving to Harlem and spitting in a like a plastic Gatorade bottle, like a wrestler, just to get some extra weight off me. And, like, luckily I was able to take a dump before my fight and lose the weight. But it's just not worth it when you have so much other shit to worry about on the day of your competition. Like, do you really want to be worrying about your weight too? Maybe you do if you're in that ultra heavy division and you're concerned about injury, because certainly the injury risk goes up in that situation. But, if you're just like, oh, it's either going to be medium heavy or heavyweight, I personally don't see much of a difference. I mean, there clearly is an empirical weight difference between those two, but if you're a master's level competitor or hobbyist, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth the added suffering. So, making weight. Next point I want to make. Arranging coaching in advance. This is something that a lot of gyms handle differently. Our gym has sort of always had this tacit understanding that if you're going to compete, we're going to make every effort we can to make sure you have a coach. And the effort is proportional with the amount of people that are doing a competition. So, for example, if you just on a whim sign up for a local NAGA and you're the only person doing it, the odds of you having a coach for that competition are sort of titrated accordingly. Whereas if we have a crew of people who are doing an IBJJF competition, we make sure that everybody has a coach, if at all possible, for all their matches. But the point I'm trying to make here is don't assume your coach is going to be there. This is, again, part of the planning conversation you want to have with your coach. Sit down with them and say, hey, coach, I'm thinking about doing this competition in 10 weeks. How should I get ready for this? And will someone be there for me the day of? And don't be a diva about it. Don't be demanding about it, because it's a lot of times like what athletes don't realize is that it's generally like a pretty big sacrifice for coaches to go to these events. Like, for example, the Jiu-Jitsu World League competition that we were participating in last weekend. We had a big crew of people, 21 people in total, including children and adults. And we had, I want to say, 4 or 5 people coaching there throughout the day. Our head coach, Shane, was there for like 8 hours. I was there from like 3 o'clock till 9 o'clock at night. It's a big ask. And, frankly, like, we're spending money to get there. We're spending money to feed ourselves while we're there. It's not exactly like a profitable endeavor for us to be there. We just do it because we love our athletes and we love the sport. And being there too that's a Saturday where I'm essentially not with my 3-year-old son and my wife, which is kind of a bummer. So what I'm trying to say here is know that all those trade-offs are involved, and know that while you have ambitions and desires, your coach also has a life and other competing priorities and responsibilities, etc. And I'm sure if you have a good coach and you're in a good gym, your coach wants to be there to support you and will make reasonable accommodations to do so, but they can't do that if you spring it on them at the last minute. So have a conversation in advance about your plan to prepare and also about your plan to have coaching for that day. And hey, like, if you're a white belt or a blue belt or even a purple belt going out and competing in a local competition like a Jiu-Jitsu World League, while it's great to have a black belt coach in your corner, just having another athlete in your corner, even if they're just like 1 belt rank up higher than you, but they have some competitive experience, that's going to be a leg up. So don't fixate so much on the rank of your coach. Just do what you can to make a plan to have support there the day of. Okay. 3 more points I want to make. First point of the 3 is if you're injured, stay home. Caveat: you're fighting in Mundials. You're fighting in the CJI. You're fighting in ADCC. You're fighting in PANS, and sponsorships are on the line, or your instructional needs to sell so you could make a living. The point I'm trying to make here is if you are a recreational athlete and you are injured, do not fight. It's plain and simple. And we need to make an important distinction here between injured and hurt, for example. To me, being hurt, as grapplers, we're pretty much all hurt all the time. I woke up this morning after training last night. My neck is sore. My back is sore. I feel beat up. I'm a little bit hurt right now. Being injured is a debilitating condition. Being injured, in my mind, is a thing where if you go out there and behave recklessly, there may be consequences that are permanent for your behavior. So, for example, I have a messed up ankle right now. I went out and competed anyway at Worlds on that messed up ankle because while I was injured, it was an injury that to some degree is reparable. Sprained ankles happen all the time, especially if you're me. You can mitigate risk involved by taping, wearing braces. And I had been preparing for this competition for a long time. Is it going to make or break my career? What career? I'm not a professional grappler. But I made a sort of calculated decision based on those things. Had it been my knee, let's say, my LCL, MCL, or ACL were bothering me, there is no way in hell I would have gone out there, because a knee injury often means surgery and at least 6 months of rehabilitation before you can grapple again. It also means I can't carry my son around when he wants to be carried around. It also means I can't dance with my wife at a wedding. These are things that are very important to me, and they also enter that calculus, and they should enter your calculus in terms of making this decision if those things are important to you too. The reason I'm making this point is I saw two crazy things happen, one at IBJJF Worlds and one at this local competition, both involving knees. At Masters, this was an athlete fighting one of our athletes, and I don't even know how this guy did it, but somehow he just destroyed his knee. It looked like he just drove it into the ground from standing, and there was clearly some damage because this guy was in a world of pain. Again, this is a situation where there should have been a verbal tap, and there wasn't. Somehow he negotiated his way into continuing the match. Our athlete won. This guy lost, and he looked like he was in a lot of pain walking off the mat. I don't know what he was thinking in terms of continuing on at that point. If I were his coach, I would have intervened and said, no, we're not doing this. Sometimes as a coach, you have to think on behalf of your athlete because they're so caught up in the heat of the moment. But that's a situation where this is a guy in his 40s, most likely with responsibilities, who may be on crutches for the next 6 to 9 months because he wanted to win a medal in an IBJJF event. Then at the Jiu-Jitsu World League, I was watching this guy. I don't know what his belt was because it was no-gi, but at the time there were a lot of blue belts going. He's hobbling out to his mat from the bullpen, and he's wearing one of those hardcore knee braces you get with the metal hinges, the kind I got one of these when I tore my MCL. Clearly the guy can't walk well. He's got this knee brace on, and I see him go to start his match, and he removes the brace and hobbles on out to the mat. Almost immediately, his match gets stopped because he's in a world of pain, essentially a verbal tap, and he negotiates with the referee to have his knee brace back. Gets his knee brace back and finishes the match. I didn't see how the match turned out because I had to coach one of our athletes, but here I'm just sitting, I'm stunned by this. Totally stunned. This is a Jiu-Jitsu World League tournament. They do a great job, but it's not like a world's level competition. It was just a local open, essentially. And I don't know this guy's story. Maybe he's trying to make a career out of Jiu-Jitsu or whatever, but it just seemed like one of those situations where as a coach, I would not have allowed my athlete to do that. And beyond that, had I not had a coach there, I would hope that I would have enough common sense to not do that. But I don't know. Blue Belt Joe is pretty stupid. So you need to know your body. You need to know your limitations, and you need to be honest with yourself. If you're hurt, if you're injured, especially, is doing this going to cause irreparable harm? If not, if yes, stay home. If not, go for it. Run it out there. Second and last point, losing well. This is, I'm going to modify this statement later at the end of this episode, but one of the things I always say to our athletes when they are preparing to compete is that there is nothing you can do to disappoint anyone in this school, with the exception of being an asshole. Being an asshole can take many shapes and forms. Being an asshole can be being rude to the referee, Being an asshole can be being rude to your opponent. Being an asshole could be not preparing adequately. Whatever. It's kind of subjective. Asshole-ish behavior takes many shapes and forms. But if you make the commitment to run it out there and you do it, you're already leaps and bounds ahead of people in the sport, in my book, who will never do it or who have never done it. So comport yourselves well. Behave accordingly. Shake the other coach's hand after the match. Shake your opponent's hand after the match. And please, please, please don't make excuses. In the aftermath of a match that you lost, I don't want to hear about how strong your opponent was. I don't want to hear about how the referee gave you a bad break. These things happen. You're going to fight strong people and lose to them. The referee is not going to see everything. The referee might be a total asshole who has it out for you. It does not matter. I want you to focus on the things you can control. You could not control the outcome of the match. Once it's done, it's done. What you can control is how you prepare for the next one. What you can control is how you incorporate the messages and learnings of that athletic event into the next one. That's what I want to talk about. And I don't even really want to talk about it in the aftermath of the event. It's such an emotionally loaded situation. The only situation in which I'm going to discuss tactical modifications in the aftermath of a match is if you have another one coming up, especially if you have another one with the same opponent or potentially the same opponent. Beyond that, I don't think it's the right time to be discussing tactics or lessons because it's an emotionally loaded scenario. But you have to sit with that emotional loadedness. You can't unload it on your coach. You can't unload it on the opponent. You have to kind of swallow it and sit with it and use it as part of your learning experience. So please shake the opponent's hand. Please be a gentleman or a gentlewoman, a gentle being, and comport yourself well. So the last thing I want to add to the don't be an asshole thing is this, again, was based on my experience at the Jiu-Jitsu World League. As I said just a few moments ago, there's only one thing you can do to disappoint anyone in our school at a comp, and that's to be an asshole. There's actually another thing you can do, and that's walk around without your shoes on. My God, I cannot tell you how many people at this competition I saw come out of the bullpen with no shoes on their feet and then walk on over to the mats. I'm sure they were probably using the bathroom with no shoes on too, just to add insult to injury. But this is at the Cure Arena in Trenton, and I was saying to one of our coaches, Coach Nick, I'm like, yeah, they literally have monster truck shows where they cart in mud onto the cement floor that we're standing on. I highly, highly doubt they're sanitizing it after the monster truck show. So yeah, you're tracking whatever is on the ground onto the mats and people are rubbing their faces all over it. Just is the same thing as if you're in your school. I'm sure your school has rules about wearing shoes off the mats, where to take them off. Let's all keep something on our feet, folks. I don't want to see you walking around the gymnasium floor in bare feet. So yeah, that's all I've got for you this week. Like I said, in a future episode, I think we'll get more into what that 8-week camp should look like. I just want to do my research there and make sure I have an informed perspective before I get into that. But hopefully this is useful to you. This is the sort of thing I wish somebody had sent to me or given to me prior to my first competition. So if you're an instructor listening to this, maybe it's a useful discussion starter in your school. If you're a student listening to this and you're looking to get ready for a competition, hopefully it serves you well. Maybe it serves some of your friends well too. That's the overall mission of this podcast, is to share good information. That's all I got for you this week. I do want to mention once again that at Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where I'm one of the partners, I'm going to be hosting this optional monthly discussion of books relevant to performance in jiu-jitsu and in life more broadly. The first session is going to be on Sunday, September 29th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. It's totally free for our students. It's totally free for listeners of this podcast too. You can attend via Zoom. Our first book is going to be Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, which is the source of the name of this podcast, in case you're curious. There are free copies of Meditations all over the internet, so get yourself one. The only requirement for participation in the book club is reading the book. Would love to have you there. I would love to meet you, meet you if you're a listener of this podcast. The link to sign up is going to be in the show notes. And again, Would love to meet you. It's totally free, zero obligation. Just click that link. I'll have your email address, and then I can share the Zoom information with you when the time comes. Really want to thank you all for listening to this podcast. Really want to thank you all for the support that's been coming for my recent athletic endeavors, such as they were. My goal of being a world champion is going to have to wait another year, but that's okay. I'm on the path, and I'm buoyed by your support. So thank you very much for everything you do to support this podcast. We are going to be having some merchandise coming out in the near future. If you're interested in supporting the podcast further, we have 2 t-shirt designs. One is going to be by Jamie, who's in black belt at our school and the designer of the logo of this podcast. Another is going to be by my good buddy Diego, who is the brain behind Power Trip Worldwide. 2 awesome designs. I most likely will be living in those shirts once I have them in my hands. And stay tuned for more information on how to obtain them if that interests you. Thanks for listening, folks, and we will talk next week.